At last we come to the grand finale of the Mass Effect series. Was it a satisfying conclusion, or was it, as some people complained at the time, a letdown? Since most of my opinions of this game will be based around the story, I'll begin with a few technical thoughts. This time the gameplay is one of iteration rather than revolution. Systems have been tweaked only slightly, so there wasn't a great leap between this and the previous game. Most of the tactics you learned there apply here as well. That's not to say there aren't a few innovations, but mostly the status quo holds sway. I felt there was a downgrade in character movement and physics. Where once you felt solid but agile, you now feel like a heavy rock rolling around the battlefield, and getting in and out of cover is like moving through syrup. The companion AI has become even worse, so your squad would rather charge into the line of fire than take cover on most occasions. The animations for retrieving and harnessing your weapons are barely functional, with guns popping in and out of your hand more often than not, and for me not being able to holster your weapon is a baffling omission. That might only be a cosmetic change, but running up to a character with your gun pointed at their head when all you wanted to do was have a conversation was annoying, especially if you like the role-playing aspect of these games. Fortunately, the way you allocate skill points has been reverted, so you have more control over your character build, but it's still not as configurable as the original game. The developers have introduced a new system where you had to overhear some side quests rather than talk to marked people. It was a weird addition, as you felt you had to walk slowly around open spaces and listen to all conversations, just in case you missed a new mission popping into your task list. Unfortunately, the glitches have increased as well, ranging from models twisting their heads at freakishly unnatural angles just to look in your direction, to cutscenes where characters pop in or are even invisible. Then there are problems with your own bespoke character. In the original releases, the character creator was less sophisticated, so you expected to have to tweak your imported model in each new entry. In the Legendary Edition, they standardised the tool across the games, but when I imported my character into Mass Effect 3 once again, it looked slightly off, meaning I had to start modifying it. That didn't make much sense, as the system should have been identical. All of these things are bearable, but after the highs of Mass Effect 2, it was a little jarring, especially as copy-pasting some of the components or systems might have yielded better results. As for the narrative, well, the game starts with Shepard having been detained for 6 months because she destroyed a Mass Effect relay and a piece of downloadable content in the second game. What this actually meant was that the whole story went into stasis for that period of time, as nobody took advantage of the grace period to build up better defences or set up contingencies. Everyone in the galaxy decided there was no threat, and with Shepard gone they could just ignore the warnings. At least that's the impression given during these opening minutes, and it sets an odd tone. We'd already seen the Galactic Council sweep Reapers under the rug, but the build-up of evidence over the years should have meant that at least the Earthbound contingent, who had supported Shepard fully in her claims, were more prepared. Instead, the Reapers just poofed into existence above the Earth and started attacking while she attended some sort of tribunal. I'm not an expert in interstellar travel, but surely there should have been a lot more warning. If I didn't know better, I would swear they were waiting just out of sight until a cutscene started. Despite this, the early sections of the game do give a sense of cataclysmic doom unfolding. As you run for your life, you can watch the Reapers tear apart the cityscape before your eyes. Spectacle is the overriding theme of Mass Effect 3. Where the first two games built up an intricate narrative and gave hints as to what might be coming, this is the payoff, so the developers went all out with the action in the safe assumption that you'd already experienced the backstory. That's not to say attempts aren't made to introduce new plots. Shepard's struggle to save a young boy as the world is being ripped apart gives a human face to the tragedy. Her failure at doing so follows her throughout the campaign, and later on we get scenes showing her regret at not being able to save him because she hadn't done more to prevent the invasion in the first place. You can see the basic ideas at work, but they never really come together. I'm assuming that this early scene was meant to precipitate a sense of grief and deterioration in her mental state as she pushes herself beyond her limits, but we never quite get that impression. The manifestation of the child as the avatar for the Reapers towards the finale might have been a powerful scene, if not for the way the ending was handled. As it stands, moments like these feel like they happen in isolation, devoid of the deeper meaning BioWare evidently wanted us to experience. This might sound inauspicious based on this one particular example, and there are moments of true pathos and emotion to be found elsewhere, but generally these come as a result of previously constructed story arcs being brought to fruition rather than anything new. Anyway, the Reapers have invaded, and as luck would have it, a set of schematics for a Reaper killing machine have been discovered on Mars. You set off to retrieve them, and the elusive man, your boss from the previous game, wants to prevent you from obtaining them. As if battling skyscraper-sized monsters weren't enough, you now have to deal with Cerberus again. Naturally you retrieve the plans to this weapon, but in order to build it you must gather resources and recruit personnel. This introduces you to the war assets, a numerical indicator of how ready you are to face your enemy in the final battle, and a component in the variant of the ending you obtain. As part of the story, the Crucible gets built regardless of your actions, but the more resources you gather, the more people you save in the final moments. While this might elicit a groan as you recall the planet scanning sections from Mass Effect 2, fortunately all of the minerals you've been collecting in the prior installments give you a nice head start. This readiness also extends to some missions you may already have completed. For example, those colonists you saved on Feros in the first game, Captain Kirihei who helped you assault on Vermeer, if he survived, or the Rachni if you spared their queen. If, like me, you're a completionist, then it's a good feeling to know that you've gained a head start merely by playing the other games thoroughly. The Reaper invasion and the Crucible construction introduces the concept of time management to Mass Effect. Normally in these types of games you work your way down your list of missions at your leisure regardless of the urgency of your ultimate goal. Now, even simple things like scanning for resources has an immediate consequence. Doing so might draw the enemy to you, causing you to dash out of your current star system to wait while the heat dies down. You can get requests for help that are time limited, missions that must be completed within a certain period otherwise you get an automatic fail, and they can be some pretty important encounters too. For example, not getting to Grissom Academy in good time means the whole institution will be wiped out, not only depriving you of war assets, but of the chance to reunite with previous crewmate Jack who just happens to work there, and, if you saved him, the unfortunate David from the Overlord DLC. The order of events can matter too. If you want to broker peace between the Geth and the Quarians, then saving Admiral Corris before the battle on Rannoch will mean he's able to persuade the migrant fleet to cease fire as a truce is being hastily cobbled together. All of this lends to a sense of urgency and, in a small way, forces you to think strategically. In a narrative sense, it does make you feel like you're coordinating the fight back in a galactic war. When it comes to the game itself, you notice that you can trick the system. That if you don't activate certain key missions, then the story stalls and you revert to the old style of play. Being able to do what you want in the time that you want may sound game-breaking, but these periods of calm mean you can deal with side quests from random people and absorb some of the background colour. When time is not on your side, these distractions can be well worth it. The sense of ending not only reveals itself in the story, but also in the way you bump into a lot of old characters from the past. Investigating a thread where the Hanar was suspected to have manipulated some Alliance Black Ops brings you into contact with Kasumi, who helps you to solve a case. Zaid returns to help you save a Volus ambassador. You go on a mission to save Miranda's sister, and even Personality Vacuum Jacob makes an appearance with a request for help. Even Shepard's ultrafan, Conrad Werner, makes another appearance with some fun conversation. It all feels like you're making one last tour of past acquaintances. And while none of these encounters are strictly necessary, they remind you of how far you've come and lend a human perspective to the abstract war your character is currently fighting. Although the new Legendary Edition contains just about every piece of downloadable content, at the time BioWare's avaricious tendencies came to the fore again, as they couldn't help but hold back additional narrative that was very relevant to the story for the sake of selling it later. In the case of new squadmate Javik, his content was actually included on the game disc, and so was less a matter of downloadable content and more one of content that was gated unless you stumped up some cash. It was an egregious move, and understandably people were extremely upset at discovering they actually owned the content but couldn't access it. Javik's story about being the last Prothean, the extinct race of beings whose records were the only reason the galaxy stood any chance in their fight now, gave a massive insight into what we'd been learning about them in the last two games. His presence acted like a lightning bolt into Liara's research, and if you were to take him to Thessia, the Asari homeworld, you discovered that these Protheans were responsible for uplifting the Asari race, and that some of their gods were based on Prothean individuals. This backstory is something people would really want to experience. The Leviathan content gave a string of missions where you ultimately came face to face with the beings that had inadvertently created the Reapers. You discover where the indoctrination process originated, how they survived, and why they'd been hidden for so many millennia. Shepard's conversation reveals a wealth of information on the background of the attacking enemy. Again, this isn't a small throwaway entry in a codex. This is deep lore, and goes to the heart of why the extinction of organic life is deemed necessary in the first place. The Omega content is possibly the most self-contained of the extras, and while it doesn't affect the main campaign aside from providing assets, it does give an explanation as to Arya's presence on the Citadel. Then there's the Citadel Dlc, an add-on that almost made up for the badly received original ending. I don't want to go overboard with my praise, as it is, without doubt, the best part of the game. In short, you have to gather all of your companions, past and present, to your newly acquired apartment on the Citadel to have a last hurrah of a party. There's a short story wrapped around this involving a clone Shepard that you have to defeat, although personally I'd have liked to have been given the opportunity to save her, as well as some amusing side quests, like appearing as yourself in one of the Blasto sequels, an in-game movie franchise involving a Hanar Spectre. All of these diversions are fun, and the team you surround yourself with are full of amusing quips and comments that show off the lighter side of the developers and cast. As for the party itself, well, there are a few different options, from sedate get-together to a raucous drink-fueled blowout, and both give you a lot of fun interactions with your crew. It's impossible not to smile when you find Kasumi surreptitiously rooting through your drawers, or appearing out of thin air to offer a blue comment when you're chatting with other guests. Edie embarrassing Trainer in public about her obvious crush on her, while Tali awkwardly tries to sidestep the conversation by nearly poisoning herself with cheese. You can make mischief by insinuating that Miranda and Jack's hostility is really a sign of buried attraction, or randomly find Javik, Zaid and Rex hiding behind furniture acting out battle tactics. Then, of course, there's the dancing. The legendary uncoordinated dancing that Shepard can indulge in throughout all of the games is finally acknowledged and celebrated. There are also moments that tug at your heartstrings. Finding a recording of Morden Solar singing Amazing Grace after he'd sacrificed himself to cure the Krogan genophage brought a real tear to my eye. I've played a lot of games on a lot of platforms, and making you care about the lives of virtual people to the extent of eliciting real emotion gives an indication of how far the medium has come. Although these events take place before the final battle, it's definitely the swan song to the whole series, and as such it's a pitch perfect send-off. So why then, in contrast, wasn't the actual ending the perfect send-off? It's the culmination of hundreds of hours of investment by the gamer and developer alike, so you'd hope that it would soar and provide you with the closure you've been so desperately craving. It did come very close to fulfilling that promise, but I suppose there was an urge to outdo Mass Effect 2, whereby the ending you received was the result of a lot of small but necessary choices throughout the game. It's a laudable goal, but the mechanisms for achieving it weren't in place. Aside from the level of resources you'd gathered from your playthrough, the war assets that could affect how much destruction was visited on the races of the galaxy, there were no other options that would substantially affect the outcome. Of course, people in your squad could be killed during the final battle, but how you dealt with the threat of the Reapers was the only real endpoint. It was the ultimate choice that the whole series had hinged on, and unfortunately BioWare fumbled it. Not in a Game of Thrones way, where the last moment soured everything that had gone before, but just enough to leave a bitter taste in your mouth. The two main problems as I see it were the so-called Star Child, the artificial intelligence that controls the Reapers, and the choices that it gave you. I won't go into the details too deeply, as there's been a lot written about this already. I will say that these last moments make the least sense in the entire series. The child is an unnecessary exposition dump built on faulty assumptions. For instance, it explains that it must wipe out organic life periodically because it can never exist peacefully with synthetic life. If you've spent 3 games carefully brokering a truce between the Geth and the Quarians, you just want to bang your head against the monitor. It mentions its creators and gives a little background lore, but you gained a deeper insight when conversing with them directly in the Leviathan DLC. The Catalyst itself takes the form of a boy you failed to save at the beginning of the game. So is the AI able to read minds, or, as I mentioned earlier, was it an attempt to visualise Shepard's guilt? It's a pretty messy conversation all round, but the final choices you're presented with are just as badly devised. You can destroy the Reapers, what you've been trying to accomplish for 3 games now. You can control them, which is exactly what the elusive man wanted to do and why you needed to stop him. Or you can mush synthetic and organic life together in an impossible hybrid, where you would alter the matrix of all organic life in the galaxy. For me, this was just space magic. Wave your wand and poof. Everything is at peace. Once the choice had been made, there were still inconsistencies, like the Mass Effect relays exploding to leave a galactic fleet stranded around Earth. Would some of the races die as their metabolism wasn't suited to our solar system? The Citadel itself, a vast city home to millions and the hub of galactic civilization, was in pieces hovering over the planet. Did anyone survive? Would the rest of the civilizations in the galaxy revert back to a less advanced state due to the removal of their governments and advanced technology? Leaving a few small threads hanging in such a vast story is fine, but these were massive questions that would have taken a whole new game to answer, but instead were just hand-waved away. It's easy to see why people were grumpy at the outcome. Having one single, unalterable ending to a role-playing game is not necessarily bad, as you can tailor the final moments to wrap up your themes in the best possible way. Giving the player more choice risks diluting the vision and leaving everyone unsatisfied. It's a shame BioWare didn't remember this. In my last playthrough, the rapidly approaching ending was what I dreaded the most, as it always coloured the final moments of one of the best video game franchises, so I reluctantly broke away from the pure experience and downloaded 2 modifications. One extended the final conversation between Shepard and Anderson, making it much more emotional and fitting, especially if you chose the orphan background. The other removed the whole Starchild moment, and forced the obviously canonical destroy option as the only ending. I was truly amazed, as it made clear that the conversation with the Catalyst, as well as the final choices themselves, were absolutely redundant. These fan-made modifications achieved a lot more by doing a lot less. Shepard sat with Anderson to see the Crucible fire an energy beam that spread through the galaxy. The Reapers were destroyed, the Citadel and relays were intact, and the races of the galaxy were able to go back to their homes to lick their wounds. I was in awe. It was so much more cathartic and satisfying watching these rearranged scenes play out than BioWare's own finale. While you could argue that in changing things I wasn't experiencing the developer's true vision, I would reply that I've experienced their vision about 5 times now, and this was the only one that gave me a sense of closure. It's even more remarkable when you know that it doesn't change or contradict the story in any way, even explicitly showing Shepard's survival. Something only hinted at in the original Destroy ending doesn't break anything. I mean, we all know she's full of medical nanobots from being dead once before. In the end, there are a lot more highs than lows in this franchise, and it's those that we remember when we think back on our experience. Sure, there are aspects we might have wished were pursued further, like the dark energy subplot that went nowhere, or the mention that the extinction cycle was not created by the Reapers. But we can't have everything. Besides, these nuggets give us hope that they'll be picked up in future installments. As it stands, the Mass Effect trilogy can stand toe-to-toe with some of the best science fiction stories. It proved that expansive themes and well-written characters can transcend any medium. It picked up where Halo and Deus Ex left off and pushed the gaming experience to a more cinematic level. Along with Grand Theft Auto 4, it helped to broaden the appeal of what was still seen as a niche hobby into the mainstream consciousness. Long-form storytelling is a hard thing to do, as market forces tend to dictate whether sequels will be viable, and no publisher wants to leave their franchise on a cliffhanger. While Assassin's Creed or Final Fantasy might seem like good examples of deep narrative, each entry in the series tends to be only vaguely related to the previous one. Off the top of my head, I can only think of the Yakuza games that have managed such a feat, weaving a single connected story together with the same protagonists for almost 20 years. Perhaps Metal Gear as well, but I'm a bit hazy about the continuity on that series. If anything, the Mass Effect games show that grand operatic stories can be told if there's the will. A sense of scale doesn't have to be compromised as long as there's a core vision. Look at Elden Ring, a game that refuses to compromise on its ideals, even to the extent of alienating some players, and it's all the better for it. There's a tendency with Western developers to piece their games together by committee, which can produce a watery, insubstantial experience. The series did start to suffer from it as it progressed, so we're fortunate that it held together so well. You only have to look at the follow-up, Andromeda, to get an idea of what might have happened if they continued with Shepard's adventures. Ultimately, the Mass Effect trilogy opened people's eyes to what could be achieved on the medium. Yes, there are flaws, some glaring, but they don't derail the franchise, and when the end credits have rolled and the final screen appears, we feel like we've been part of something special. We may then have to return to our normal lives, but for those brief hours we were able to escape the humdrum and save the galaxy in the most epic way possible. All in all, that seems like time well spent.